All right, so I made a couple changes to the deck. I originally was going to go in depth on them, but honestly, unless the changes stick for sure, I would rather just kind of touch on them and go, and then over time, kind of keeping my eye on them, and then if it really feels right, then that might be the time for a longer discussion. So the quick changes were, and I'll kind of walk you through the thinking at least. I really wanted Bifrost in here, so I was also fiddling with a 30-second land that kept becoming this or that, and finally I just said, what if the land becomes the Bifrost slot? Can I get away with 31? I've played low land counts in the past. Let me try it. So I pulled the land, I made it by force. It seemed to be all right, so I played it like that for a while. And I had a conversation with Brian about Weissman about he says I have too many artifact removal in my deck, and at the same time he made a really interesting comment about how the Soul Ring and Mana Crypt of this format are kind of like the Ancestral and Library in old school format. And of course you play 4 Strip Mines and even main deck Raid Bless in that format just to deal with Ancestral and Library. So maybe it's all right to run a little extra artifact mana, but even with that, he still thinks I've overdone it. I'm not so sure that's true because the deck in 100 card, 99 cards, I think you need an extra abundance of those things just to get them in a timely manner. It's not just about getting them, but getting them on time. So I feel a little more comfortable with it. But in order to listen to my friend, who is, obviously one of the best players in the world and a wise individual to listen to if you're going to pick anyone to listen to when it comes to Magic for sure, or most things for that matter, I decided I will make a slight tweak. I took out the Bifrost and I made it a Braid. This still keeps the same amount of artifact removal that I wanted, but it gives me a card that's flexible and allows me to do something else so that it kind of hedges towards the direction that I think you would prefer to either have this card be, card drawing, removal of some other sort, or something along those lines, mana producers. So I think in this case, he probably would. I hadn't spoken to him about this change, but I'm sure that he would think this was a little bit better than having the Bifrost alongside the Vandal Blast and everything else. I'm sure he probably. My imagination is that he still thinks I have too many artifact removal, but I'm not convinced, and until I am, I won't necessarily make the change. But I'm certainly open to that possibility. But for now, I like a Braid. A Braid's cool because it lets me deal with early Dark Carve on it. It lets me also kill other mana sources like Priest of Titania and Selvalas and stuff like that. Certain commanders will die to it. So, and you can muddle the mixture for it. It's a pretty good card. And I wasn't super happy about it in 1v1 format because it's not flashy, but I think I'm a little happier with it here because of this card. You just want to kill it on turn 2 or turn 1 if you can, and I think a Braid actually goes. I think its stock goes up in this format rather than the 1v1 format, even though there were more creature targets there. But creature targets you usually have time to deal with. This card you need to deal with like right away. So, or at least that's my impression. So the other change I made was based on a comment from one of the folks in the channel who had mentioned that they thought that Mystical Teachings was the flex slot. For them it was. And I thought about that and I realized that I kind of agree with that for a couple different reasons. One is like, I asked myself, would I feel happy if I went first turn Mana Vault, second turn Teachings? And the answer is no. Now, that's not true for just about any other card I have that's 4 mana or higher. Like if I run out of Mana Vault into a Lotus, I'm ecstatic. A Teferi is incredible. I'm quite happy to do it with a Tezzeret. I mean, obviously not Forceful, but I'm counting. Come on, who are we kidding? It's 0. Treachery, maybe not, but it's not the worst thing in the world to make that early play if the thing you're stealing is, I don't know, Dark Confidant or something. For the most part, you just wouldn't do it. Treachery is a lot closer to 0 mana than 5, to be honest. Factor Fiction, I'm good with that play. Jace, I'm good with that play. This is just not possible, so I doesn't really count, but if I had to make the play, I'd be good with it because you could just bounce this and counter or whatever. I'm certainly happy to mana vault into a Thran or a Karn, and so that left Teachings. And Teachings was the one card where I was like, if I went first turn Vault, second turn Teachings, I'm not happy. Like, I'm probably going to get tithed because my mana's in big trouble and I need to dig my way out of it, but I'm not happy with that. Like, that's not a good use of a mana vault. I'd do it, but I would not do it happily, right? So I replaced it with a card I would be happy to make that play on, which is Kaya. I've loved this card in Legacy, and it's just a great card. I mean, it's always going to get you like 2-for-1 or more right off the bat, because the -2 is so crazy. And it steals tempo, it combos with Spellseeker and even Breya to some extent. It's just an all-around amazing card. And I was surprised I hadn't put it in here sooner. So I decided to swap it out. And I'm going to see if I miss the Teachings. I like the flexibility of Teachings, but it's not as proactive as I would like. It is a kind of like wait for the right moment to play it card. And, you know, it kind of sits in your hand unless you have 4 mana that are permanent, not temporary. Whereas like Kaya is just man, the sooner you get that thing on the table, the better. I think I'm a lot happier having that, but like I said, we'll see. All right, so now I've got some games for you. I'm gonna start with Bad Actor. The first opponent was, I'm gonna run through probably, I think games from the 25th and up, because I believe the 24th was, yeah, Dr. Land Destruction. So I already made a video for that, and then I haven't made anything for the following games, but there's a limit to how much time I have to make this video, so I'm gonna have to probably just start right here on the 25th. But I have this one person that I plan to lead off with, and then I'll skip and have no videos with this person again. It was Shabbytown 1000, and you'll see why. So I make this with the thought that if you don't enjoy playing against people who have a certain mindset in this game, like Shabbytown 1000 appears to have, then this is my warning to you not to necessarily play that person. So they're playing Azuri, and pay attention to how incredibly slow their elf deck is. So this is an elf deck that hasn't played a single elf. Here we are on we're moving into turn 3 soon. I'm going to, of course, get the all-powerful Soul Ring, right? All right, first elf on turn 3, Imperious Perfect. I have Plow, of course. I'm going to exile that before it can get to work. And just pass for the turn. Opponent goes for a Viridian Corruptor, their second elf, which would kill my Soul Ring. So this is good, I approve, but this is still a very slow draw on their part. And I am, of course, going to mana like that. All right, so my turn. I was thinking about running out Copy Artifact, but I said, I don't need to copy here. I really just want to draw extra cards. And I don't copy because if I draw a counter, I could save myself from having to force a will with my Copy Artifact. Opponent goes for Crows and Grip, so I can't even respond to that. So I'm out the Soul Ring that I didn't copy, but I do at least have Force of Will. Unfortunately, the Symbiote threatens, I'm going to pause here. All right, so the Symbiote threatens to steal the Monarch. And I knew when I played the Monarch it was going to be a little bit of a risk against the green deck, but my opponent's just like, I don't know if it's their deck or their draw, but it's just so incredibly slow that I feel like I actually had time to become the Monarch against the green deck, even without the ability to play my commander, and it should be fine. We'll see if that's actually true now. So my opponent gets the Symbiote out, plays their Renegade prior to attacking, and that's important right here because it allows me to make this play, which is even worse for them. Snapcaster targeting swords, block, and because they played it prior to attacking, I get to plow this commander. If they hadn't played prior to attacking, just attacked, I still would have had to Snapcaster and block to protect the Monarch. But then, I'm going to pause, but then they would have known not to run their commander into plow, and so we would have just ended the turn and I would have got no flashback. So they give me free value right there. So on the next turn, I play Spellseeker, get a mana drain, and my opponent decides, I know what I'll do. I'll give him more value. Well, they don't right away, right? Like I get to attack for 1 first. And I mystical tutor, sorry. I attack for 1 first, and then I mystical tutor and show my opponent I mystical tutored for Mind Twist. So I've mystical tutored for Mind Twist, and I've tutored for Mana Drain. And my opponent decides they're going to make a 3 mana play on their turn that is an instant that they could play in response to a Mana Drain. They're going to make it on their main phase and just feed the mana into my Mana Drain with no follow-up whatsoever. Like, it's just so bad, right? So, fine. I just figure, you know what? They're just a casual player, whatever. I'll make the kill and then move on with my life, and they'll move on with their life, and then maybe they'll never play me again, and that's fine. And instead, my opponent griefers me for 12 minutes or whatever it was left on the clock, tapping and untapping the land, as you saw, just to make sure that the clock has to run all the way down before the game ends. And I ask them if they're going to continue, and they say no. So they're not AFK. It wasn't a glitch. It was pure griefering. And then we had a little back and forth conversation about that. But yeah, so Shabbytown 1000, bad actor, bad deck, just all around bad. So I recommend avoiding. Anyway, I'm going to go on with the games that I promised, which would be from the 25th forward. So I haven't reviewed these games, so hopefully they don't bug out too badly. I'm actually surprised the one against Shabbytown didn't, considering that they stalled for 12 minutes. All right, so Warscarred Goblin is the first opponent here, and we'll take a look at it. This might have been a mulligan to death. Yeah, it is. My opponent's playing Teferi. Unfortunately, they just mulligan to death. So I hopefully the new mulligan rule is going to fix some hands like that. I realize, of course, that it'll make their hands even more broken, but at the same time, I think that's worth it if it means that we have less games that end on turn 0 like that. Because what kind of a game ends on turn 0? Like, that's not, I don't know, that's not interesting to me. So anyway, I move on though, and I play against Professor Trench, and I've got a first turn Weathered Wayfarer against their Skull Briar deck, and my opponent's got a first turn Tap a Forest Pass. Not too impressive. And runs out Night's Whisper. I figured they'd go Skullbriar and I'd just plow the thing, but nope, they get a couple extra cards and then discard. A very strange play. Unfortunately, my opponent then Tragic Slips my Wayfarer, and I decide not to like activate the Wasteland targeting it itself like last turn and do it using the Wayfarer here, because I have the Tithe, and so when my opponent kills, I just Tithe for 1 land. So even though I had Tithe and a Wayfarer against a green player, I really thought I was going to be drawing a lot of free lands this turn. I didn't feel like it was worth it to sit around and wait, especially with a Kaya and a Teferi waiting, ready to go, and then of course there's Stack Fading here. So my opponent, for their turn, they played Skullbriar, hit me, so they'd get the counter as opposed to Dak, and then play Sword of the Animist, equip their commander, or attempt to. I plow the commander, and now I don't know what they were thinking exactly, but I think it hit them like they just ran out equipment against a Dak Faden with a creature in play. And that's probably not going to work out too well. So they gave me a mana fetching card. I don't know. But as soon as I make the play on the Sword Supply there, my opponent concedes. So we move on to the next game. Unfortunately, I didn't actually get to get my Planeswalker into play and start doing Kaya. Because, like, man, there's something so satisfying about activating Kaya's -2. Anyway, I've got this game here against Burks BL running Thassac out of the sea, and I've got nothing too crazy, but it's a hand that can go get Soul Ring, so we're gonna keep it, even though the mana is a little rough. So we'll get Soul Ring down and pass. Well, I'll use the mana, of course, to play Jitte here, just because it's more mana efficient than playing the Clamp. Although the Clamp's actually more important against mono blue. And I'm going to Vamp here, because I really wanted to Teferi. However, I also want card advantage and mana. So the easiest way to do that is just get Crucible. And this way I have a counterspell up for this turn. I can play Teferi next turn. No rush on that. I still got a card. It happened to be land. But this is exactly what I needed anyway, so we're good there. All right, so I'm going to brainstorm for the turn and then leave myself with sculpt the perfect hand, fetch land to seal the deal, and mind twist my opponent. And they are scooping, I think. And I hit my opponent's mana crypt, which is crazy, right? Like, they didn't try to slip it out against me. I understand why, because they didn't need it, didn't want to take needless damage, but definitely worked to my favor there. So I just run out to Fairy, and opponent's got nothing, and they scoop. This was a little bold on my part. I could have Snapcaster or Mind Twisted for one and played Teferi. But the reason I didn't was because as long as they didn't draw an actual counter that turn, if Teferi hits here, I don't see how I'm losing. And being able to Snapcaster at the end of their turn and go get Vampiric Tutor means that even if they countered here, as long as it's nothing too backbreaking, like, I don't know, just Cryptic Command that would be a heftier setback. As long as it's nothing like that, what I could do is let's say they just regular countered here, and then I Snapcaster at the end of their turn and Vamp for Yogwill. I could just will Teferi right back into play anyhow. So I was good with it, but my opponent didn't have anything, so Teferi just crushes them. I didn't draw cards there, but I tucked their actual creatures stealing capability. But very soon I was going to be able to start drawing extra cards, and then with Snapcaster in my hand and a counterspell in the graveyard, we certainly weren't going to recover. Alright, pardon me. So my next opponent is Taurus playing Afara, God of the Polis. That's an interesting one, but I don't think it's particularly strong. It has too many variables. Like, you're only getting the extra cards under certain circumstances. So while it is good to play a card drawing commander, you can see by force here not being a braid. Either way would have been perfectly fine. Of course, I get an early dove in against this opponent, and they just give up. I don't know why they gave up to the turn. What is that? 4 mana crypt, but I'm fine with it. I'm obviously not going to complain. Anyway, what I was saying about Afar is it's not consistent, so it doesn't really affect the board state that well, and it doesn't really affect your hand, consistently. So it's not a card that I would recommend as a blue-white commander. You want your commander to generate mana, generate cards, or disrupt your opponent. But you want it to be something that doesn't just happen under some condition that's hard to, bring about. You want it to be something that is pretty easy and pretty consistent. So here I've got what looks like a pretty bad hand, but I'm able to Vampiric Tutor, and I don't know if you saw what, I'm not sure if you expected what I was able to do there, but so I have only one land, I fetch a scrub land, and I Vampiric Tutor. And so how do I get how do I develop my mana for the turn? Well, the answer was I Vampiric Tutor for Mana Crypt because I'm holding Will, and then on my turn I'm able to play Crypt off of the Scrub, cast with Crypt and Scrub rather, cast Yawgmoth's Will, replay the fetch land that I used to go get another black source. Fortunately, there's one more in the deck. Unfortunately, it doesn't produce blue, but that's what I got to do. Do what you got to do, right? And then from there, I'm able to Vampiric Tutor. So what did I put on top of my library this time? We'll see. Opponent's got a solid start. Some really good early mana development and a way to refill their hand with that clamp. Well, I put the Soul Ring, of course. All right, but I've got Teferi, and I decide I'm going to draw an extra card rather than try to tuck the Skull Clamp and then have him attack and kill my Teferi. I'm just going to try to outpace him on cards. Meanwhile, I'm using Teferi to... I used Teferi to minus his... He gets a good enchantment out, but he had clamped his creatures, so he got more cards in hand, but I was able to get what he had in play off the board and deck fading away his clamp, Teferi away his enchantment, and then on the next turn, Jace away his creature. So my opponent is getting buried in Planeswalkers here. It does get a Gitu Fire that kills Teferi, but there's still 2 more active Planeswalkers. And I just craft the perfect hand. With my opponent's stolen Skull Clamp, I can now use Dovin Clamp combo, and I've got, here's the turn 3, so my opponent redrew their enchantment. And I've got multiple counters in my hand at this point. Game's really over. Jace active, Dak active, Dovin active with a Skull Clamp. There's no coming back from that. So my opponent scoops. So it was just an interesting one because of the value will, I think. All right, so moving on to the 26th, which was basically today. The days rolled over. I've got a couple games against Turbo Bird here, and then we'll see what else pops up. I just got to remember to skip that game against the bad opponent. All right, so Turbo Bird is running Niv Mizzet Perrin, the uncounterable commander, and that could be good. And Turbo Bird has a Mana Crypt into a Deep Analysis for card draw, so that's definitely good. But I've got a pretty fast start myself with the Mox Diamond Weathered Wayfarer play. And I go ahead and fetch up Sword of Feast and Famine. Oh, excuse me. Here, because I already have a Skull Clamp in play, and today I figure it would be way too slow to deal with Niv Mizzet. So I'd rather just try to disrupt my opponent with Weathered Wayfarer and then get the sword swinging and hit him with a double disruption. Unfortunately, that plan kind of falls apart when my opponent board clears my creatures. I don't even get to draw off the clamp. So now I have no way to attack my opponent directly, but I run out of Dak Faden against an untapped island with a untapped Strip Mine. My opponent plays a Force Spike effect, and I pay for it. So they get to keep a land for the turn, but I steal a Mana Crypt. And now my opponent's down a ton of mana. So although I think they actually either were ahead on cards or probably ahead on cards because they drew a little bit extra, and then there's this nice play here where they disallow my Strip Mine. So even though my opponent's doing really good things, they're just way, way, way behind on mana. And I'm able to leverage my Skull Clamp once my Breya comes down and put them behind on cards. Now they Windfall to correct the situation with cards, but it doesn't do anything about the mana situation, much less the fact that they're going to start taking beatings with Sword of Feast and Famine, which will effectively double my mana, while stealing cards and putting them behind on cards as well. No coming back from this, so opponent rightly scoops, I believe. The next game, Turbo Bird then jumps into a game with me and whips out Rowan and Will Kenrith. Rowan Kenrith and Will Kenrith. I assume it's like spouse, implied spouse. I assume it's not brother and sister, but who knows. Anyway, but it's a partner mechanic. So, you know, my opponent's going to already be up a card effectively because the partner mechanic is like starting with 9 cards in your hand versus 8. And has a Mana Vault start, which is pretty gnarly. I have a Felwar Stone into Breya, which also does well, but then my opponent misses a land drop, and despite having 1 more mana, and potentially could have had 6 mana to my 4 for the turn at least, has nothing particularly relevant to do with it, and scoops. Breya does a good job of containing either Planeswalker, and my opponent's far off from playing the red one anyway. So the blue one could have come down, and give my opponent some small advantage by shrinking 2 of my creatures, making them 0/3s. But of course I would have been able to just vindicate it. My opponent doesn't necessarily know that, but they do know that they're mana screwed, so they just scoop. So, alright, fair enough. So we got Batty Ben Patty here. Batty Ben Patty? And we ended up playing 2 games because this person had set up a match, and I was hungry to just play Magic, so I joined a match even though I don't usually do that. And this person's also playing partners, Toothy and Pier. And still I have the Biforce and not the Abrade, and I certainly wish I would have had the Abrade in this game. But instead of having that, what I do have is a heck of a start when I rip a Soul Ring off the top. I mean, I've got a ton of mana coming down here. I don't necessarily have Oh, well, we're going to glitch. So I had a ton of mana here. I go Soul Ring into Monolith, and my land into Dynamo, tap the Dynamo, play Feast of Famine and pass. And it's pretty much all downhill from my opponent for there. It doesn't take more than a couple of turns before they end up scooping. And we move to game 2. It's one of those things where my opponent was just so far behind. There is no coming back from that. Alright, so in this game, I ponder, and I choose not to shuffle. I take a Grim Monolith. My opponent plays an Azor's Gateway. I then run out the Grim, Coalition Relic, Vandal Blast their Gateway, which would have given them the ability to dig for more lands or other type of things. And I think my opponent's mana is screwed again, so maybe they need to work on their deck, but or maybe it's just terrible luck. It happens. But with that, Patty Bin Patty scoops it up. All right, so the next game here is against a Tiny Man Cow. And Tiny Man Cow is running Galta, the Primal Hunger. And I've got, early artifact kill. So lovely. My opponent runs out Green Sun Zenith. Of course, I use Vandal Blast over Fragmentize because if their next follow-up was something like Sylvan Library, I want to be able to take it down. Here I kind of mess up a bit. My opponent runs out Selvala. Well, maybe. I don't know. I remanded it, but I'm not sure if I should have done that, or if I could have handled it a little bit differently. But at any rate, I actually ended up trading a Snapcaster for Llanowar Elf on the next turn, and then Enlightened Tutoring for Soul Ring, and using the mana to Mind Twist my opponent. So this way, if my opponent doesn't draw a creature that's going to trigger Selvala's card draw, and they don't, I get to then turn right around and get a Treachery off, and play Breya and draw a card with active Breya ready to go. And that is just too much for my opponent, so they give up, which is cool. And then I play against Zoo C Chill, or Joe C Chill, rather, pardon me. Running Balin Wandering Knight, so a equipment-based strategy is going to be very, I assume, hosed by the Dak Fade in my hand. My opponent actually runs out 2 artifacts that turn. I assumed it was equipment-based because that's what the commander does. So when I saw the Dak Fade in my hand, I was like, I have to keep, obviously. And opponent doesn't really disappoint. They run out a bunch of equipment-related plays. And but I have active Dak, right? So pretty hard for them to do much here. I'm going to just... don't see how to tap my mana quite this way, so I think we're going to bug. But I end up playing the card that you don't see in my hand that actually was in my hand. I played Hallowed Fountain there, and I cast Metalkin Shackles, stole the Pure Steel Paladin. And then on the next turn, my opponent, I don't know what play they made, but on my turn, I drew Treachery, and I Treachery my opponent's play, whatever it was. It's funny, I have their Paladin, I have their Everflowing Chalice, I have their next creature who was a follow-up play, and Dak Faden ends up stealing one of their other artifacts. So I've stolen like 4 or 5 of my opponent's permanent, and they just like pack it in. So no big deal there. So next is Ocelot Prime. Excuse me. And Ocelot Prime here is running a Queen Marchesa deck, which I have like a crazy start with a Dark Confidant in my opening hand, but my opponent does get an Inquisition out. But unfortunately for them, they miss the ability to make their second play. So while they stop Dark Confidant, I get to go Merchant Scrolling for a Force of Will off my to work in tandem with the Preordain that I drew on the last turn. And my opponent misses yet another land drop and scoops. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but if they hadn't, then I think the next play for me would have been to ready and start plussing it up to get creatures on the board followed by. But I might not have. It might not actually been a ready. My next play might have been just Crucible. It depends on if I would have drawn land. Because if I hadn't drawn land, I would have played Crucible with Force for Preordain and the ability to not play a land that turn, but play a land on the next turn from the graveyard in order to get Karn down, backed up by Force. So well, I think that would have made the most sense. However, had I drawn mana this turn like a land, Mox Diamond or something like that, then I would have ran out the ready almost certainly, and because I would have known I was going to hit my 4th mana for Karn, and then I could get around to using Crucible for like the 5th. So at any rate, Ocelot Prime is another. That gaming there is another example where we might benefit from the new mulligan if it comes to pass. All right, so I've got a game here against Nor H238, and my opponent is running Joyra of the Gitu. So I haven't seen this. I saw this commander a lot back in the day, and I haven't seen it much since. All right, so I'm going to strip mine my opponent during their upkeep in case they have Stifle. I'd rather have them tap an island during their upkeep than tap it at the end of my turn. Their turn they just play land and pass. On my turn I play Seal of Cleansing. On their turn they play a creature and a Paradise Mantle. My turn I play Coalition Relic, and when they attempt to equip the Paradise Mantle, I then kill the Paradise Mantle. So they never actually get extra mana off of it. I charge a Coalition Relic into their turn, and on my turn I Brainstorm and find a Crucible to go ahead and start recurring my Strip Mine. So that's exactly what I do. I get into this thing where I'm strip mining and playing my commander, and they have no answer for that and scoop. All right, so next was this game against Dizzy Turtle. Dizzy Turtle. Name sounds familiar. Anyway, I'm not sure why, but yeah, it's this game against Omnath Lord, Locus of Rage, and I'm at least going first. My opponent runs out of turn 1 Soul Ring, so should be an interesting game. I get early Mox, so this was an interesting game though. So I play for my second land. So my first land I play a fetch land. I don't fetch. My second land I play basic island. That way, if my opponent has Wasteland, they can't kill it. And I also throw on Mox Opal because if my opponent has a Wheel of Fortune, they've already started dumping their hand with the Soul Ring, which means they could easily throw a few more cards on the table and then wheel. If they're going to wheel, I want to make sure I have Mox Opal on the board. So I decide that playing that, and also potentially drawing fire for any upcoming artifacts that I might like to get going, made sense to me. So with that in mind, play the Opal. Normally I would hide it in my hand. But unfortunately for me, my opponent goes Kodama's Reach so that they can make their land drop and then make a development with mana. And at the same time, they strip mine me. So, ouch. I'm lucky I top deck a Dark Confidant. So, to go with my exact C's 2 mana on that. Opponent then plays Crucible and strip mines me again. Dark Confidant reveals Soul Ring, Scrubland. Totally giving up the goods. I go Scrubland into Soul Ring, into Crucible of Worlds. I can't replay a land, but now my Mox Opal's active. And just like that, we went from me having only 1 mana against Crucible of Worlds Strip Mine to me having 5 and actually surpassing my opponent's mana. I think for the rest of the game, I go ahead and next turn they don't do much. They just Strip Mine me. I get a Teferi down, tuck away not the Crucible but the Soul Ring. And at this point in the game, my opponent has had enough, despite their early dominant position of Strip Mine Crucible. Dark Confidant gave me everything I needed to win that game. So thank you, Bob, for that. All right, so next I played against Sensitive. And Sensitive is running an interesting commander, Amara Soul the Accord. I think that's a pretty powerful commander, and you'll see in this game, same thing, strip during upkeep in case they have something. Probably should have waited for draw phase just to prevent them from enlightened tutoring. But anyway, all right, so my opponent gets their commander down early. I'm just stalling there, hoping that I can find a Soul Ring to accelerate me past this part of the game. but no dice. And my opponent finds a Thalia on turn 3. That is nasty. With the commander that they have running, where the threats keep growing, it sets me back so hard. And then my opponent plays Gideon's Avengers, so they're just coming hard on the board, going after my life total. And I was thinking, gosh, if they Armageddon here, I'm doomed. Instead, they just put an enchantment on Thalia that says if it dies, they get 3/1/1s. For my turn, I go ahead and bounce it with Jace, and I have a Spell Seeker to block. And my opponent sends all face. So I go ahead and chump block and gain 2. And then use a combination of Mystical Tutor and Jace to clear the board with a Deluge, and I pass back. Opponent on their turn gets a card that produces angels whenever, instead of tokens, whenever my opponent would get a token. My turn, I get a bunch of mana into play along with Crucible Strip. Opponent's token thing doesn't become active. They play their commander instead. I just bounce it. And I actually continue a Strip Mine Crucible assault on their mana base while developing with artifact mana on my side and mind twisting my opponent. And you would think that they would give up here, but they actually don't give up just yet. So it just, I thought, was kind of funny. Strange, rather. So I just continue to try to find reasons to encourage them. I draw like a ton of cards off of a Skull Clamp, and I use that to play Tezzeret. And then when I finally plus Tezzeret, my opponent gives up. And of course, I guess they realize that Tezzeret is representing a lot of damage coming at them with his ultimate, which is ready to go. Or maybe it was just that last permanent that cut me over the line in my opponent's mind. But that was a neat game because my opponent Strip Crucible locked me out of the game. It appeared, and then in a single turn I flipped it on them and strip blocked them instead. So I thought it was pretty cool. I'm actually getting a little bit tired, so I don't think I'm going to run through the last couple of games, but you kind of get the drift. One of them is, of course, the Shabbytown one, so there'll only be about 3 more. Hopefully you enjoyed watching them. I apologize. This certainly was not my best video, but I thought I'd make you something, and I had that incident, that brush in with that guy or person, and I figured I'd give you notice on Shabbytown 1000 so that you can avoid them if you want to, or play them if that's your interest, or maybe just ignore them. But I figured I'd give you the heads up. So hopefully you enjoyed watching some of those games, and I'll try to get a better one, well, hopefully this weekend. Although I'm not sure because I'm going to be out of town for a little while, so we'll see. I've got work pulling me a bunch of different directions, so which was the other reason why I did the earlier video. So thank you again. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I look forward to your comments on the changes as well as the games, and I'll see you next time.